Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. For some announcements, this evening, tonight, for women, there's a program called Adar Fest. It's a program to get you into the spirit of the month of Adar. If you're interested in joining, just as soon as you leave here today, go to jewishacademy.com, sign up. Tomorrow evening at 7:30, same room, same place, same speaker. I'm going to be speaking here tomorrow night, 7:30. The topic is calling all heroes. So if you grew up with any superheroes in your life, whether it was Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, you're getting an echo there. Superman, Spider-Man. We're not going to be talking about them at all. But we're going to speak about heroes. Who are your heroes? And I'd love to have you join 7:30 tomorrow. I'd love to have you in the room with your smiling faces. We'll give you some coffee, tea, and cookies if you come. If not, it will be available on Zoom, and then later it will be uploaded to YouTube. But again, I invite you all to join us tomorrow evening, 7:30. Those out there in Zoom land or on Facebook, you go to jewishacademy.com. You can sign up for that talk, and you'll get the link to the Zoom link. Next week is the holiday of Purim. Monday evening, we're going to read the Megillah next door in the sanctuary. You're all welcome to join. And then Tuesday, we're going to have a huge county fair over here. So if you come 4 o'clock, if you want to hear the reading of the Megillah, 4:30, parking lot here and in the back of this building is going to be turned into this whole county fair. It'll be great if you have children and grandchildren, bring them along. There'll be lots of food. There'll be a whole carnival. There'll be rides. You got to celebrate Purim with us. Next Tuesday, mark it on your calendars. We look forward to having everyone join. Today's class is sponsored by Jeff and Lori Goldchin, and they sponsored this is in honor of my 25th birthday. Thank you very much. And their blessings for 120 years of good health and happiness and nachas for my children and grandchildren. Thank you so much, Jeff and Lori. Also sponsored in honor of their granddaughter Rachel's 13th birthday, and Hashem should bless her with the same, with lots of healthy years, long years, happiness, love of family, and Yiddishkeit. Thank you very, very much. So I'd like to try to finish the theme of Tzion that we've been talking about the last few weeks. Tzion, you're familiar with the word Zion, Zionist, but really it's a borrowed word. The word Tzion is a biblical word, and it's focusing on Jerusalem as a geographical place, but Tzion really has a meaning. The word itself has a meaning, and that's to be a banner, to be a, what do you call on the freeway? The billboard. That we're to be a billboard for the world, which means when the world sees us, they should be able to see godliness and goodness and holiness, that we should be recognized as a member of the chosen people. So we have spoken a lot at this class over the last few years about chosen people, what it means, what's the mission statement. But the idea of Tzion means is that when the world sees you, they should recognize that. They should see something in you that says, there goes a member of the chosen people. Not in an arrogant-like way, but that they understand your assignment and they understand your task is to bring goodness and blessings and holiness to all the families on the face of the earth. And that's what we've been discussing. I'd like to get a little personal with you today. Although what I believe I'm about to talk about is very much on topic of what does it mean to be that billboard, that banner for God. As many of you know, a little less than 3 months ago, just about exactly 3 months ago, my mother passed away. And I was obviously in New York for the funeral and for Shiva, then came back here, and then we made up a time for all the siblings to come back together in New York to begin a very long, difficult process. My parents lived in the same house for 55 years. They never threw anything out. They saved everything. And it's a 3-floor house with a basement, a lot of cabinets, a lot of closets, and lots to go through. Now, when my father passed away 11 years ago, We didn't touch a thing. My mother was living in the house, and therefore we respected that privacy of leave everything exactly where it was. So nothing was touched. And when I say nothing, I'm talking about his coat was still hanging on a hanger, everything exactly the way it was the day he passed away. We touched nothing, we opened no drawer, never looked into anything. We just left the house and focused on taking care of my mother. That was my father's wish, that my mother stay in the house and be taken care of in the house. And thanks to my siblings and my nephews and my nieces and great-nephews and great-nieces and a lot of great caregivers, my mother lived 11 years in that house after my father passed away. But now the task was, we have to start opening up cabinets and drawers, and it's not easy. I imagine many of you in this room have done it. It's not a fun process. First of all, it's emotional. I mean, you're touching their items, and it's gut-wrenching. Almost as painful as a funeral, really, if you think about it. I mean, it's the first time you're coming into physical contact with their belongings. But there's a lot of papers as well. And as I said, they never threw anything out. You know what that means? Any letter I ever sent them from camp, they saved. There was a box of letters from camp, and every letter they ever received from any of their children, they saved every single one. So I'm reading letters that I wrote when I was 7 years old. I mean, you know the typical letter that you write when you're in camp, right? The weather is nice. I like playing baseball. Swimming was good. I mean, but the fact that they saved it, it warms you to know that this was precious to them. That they actually had a box where they stored it neatly. They saved every single piece of mail they ever got from Chabad of the Canal. Now you know how much mail that is. Imagine multiply that by all these years. They never threw out a thing, not a single flyer, not a single lecture. Every single brochure I ever mailed out I was looking at, going back to the 80s. It was amazing that they kept it in a very neat-like way. They saved everything. And so I wasn't just reliving my relationship with them, but I was reliving their relationship with each other, their relationship with each of my siblings, because everything was right there. And they brought over from their prior house, where they lived in Borough Park before they moved to Crown Heights, all of those belongings. So it wasn't just limited to 55 years. This was going back literally to the beginning of their time, and how they managed to keep every single thing. All there, pretty organized, but all there. For the first time seeing a lot of this. I found in the box that my mother put away of her Chabad of the Kineo connections, if any of you joined us for the high holidays, specifically this was from the Hyatt, there's a seating card with your name on the seat. When you come in to find your seat, she saved her seating cards with her name on it and the seat number. She kept it. And it brought me to the memories of those high holidays that they were here. Specifically, the last high holidays of my father's life he spent here. My father wanted to be in this community. It was at the Hyatt Hotel at the time. And some of you, I think, may have been there. No, Sheila was there at the time. But it was towards the end of Yom Kippur, and everyone is waiting for the blowing of the shofar so they can get to the snacks that's under their chair. And my father motions to me that he wants to speak, that he wants to say a few words. And he came up on stage. This is after his age and wasn't in the best of health at the time, fasting the entire day, refused not to, he wanted to fast. And he gave this powerful blessing to the community and told everyone how precious it was to spend Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with them, and how he's been in so many places in his life for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, some good and some not so good. Remembering what it's like on the run, and then remembering to be reunited with his Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then to have the holidays with the Lubavitcher Rebbe of our generation. And he reminisced about all of it, and he said these words, and yet this is the most precious Yom Kippur of my life. Sharing it with you and seeing such precious Jewish souls come together from all different levels of observance and reaching out to God together in unison. To him, it was such a powerful, powerful moment. And as much as I was thinking like, well, the people are hungry, the people are hungry, they want to eat, no one moved. They were just so taken by this elderly man putting all of his emotions out there with whatever strength he had left within him. During these 3 months of mourning and saying Kaddish for my mother, I've been reflecting a lot on the lives of my father and my mother and the legacy that they left behind. And I can unequivocally say that my siblings and I were truly blessed to have been raised by the ultimate role models of what it means to be a billboard for God. To make a Kiddsuh Hashem in life, to sanctify God's name in how they conducted themselves. Now, over the years, in different lectures and classes, I've shared many stories about my father's youth, especially of the war years. And I won't be doing that today, other than to say that this was a man who lost his entire family during the Holocaust. Total wiped out. Sisters, brothers, parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, all of his siblings. And yet, in all of his ways, he exemplified piety, faith, devotion, and commitment to the teachings of God's Torah and the mitzvos. You know, many, and we can't blame them, rebelled. Like, where were you, God? And how could you have allowed this to happen to my family? And none of us would have the right to question that. And yet for my father, it had the opposite effect. It thus strengthened his resolve that what Hitler took away, he would rebuild. And he lived to see the rebuilding of Jewish life in Israel and here in America and throughout the world. And I could fully attest that his love for God wasn't just evident in his words, but it was in his behavior, in his demeanor, in his disposition, in his very being. At all times, whether it's day or night, he was a walking, talking Kiddsuh Hashem, a sanctification of God's name. It wasn't just when he was at home with the family. For the first 25 years of my father's marriage to my mother, my father worked as a Rebbe in a yeshiva. He taught 6th grade. He taught Talmud. 6th grade is usually when you're first starting to study Talmud. So he was really this introductory class for yeshiva students into the world of Talmud. And this was in Brooklyn. The yeshiva then was on Bedford Avenue. And that's where he would go every day and teach. By the time the 11th child was born, that would be my baby sister, my father could no longer survive on a teacher's salary. And so he needed side jobs to keep it all going. And he ended up landing a job after some time with the city of New York. He worked for the Board of Education, not in its education department, but it's in real estate department. And he negotiated the leases, the sales, and the purchases of property for the Board of Education. Board of Education in New York is one of the largest school districts in the world, and they have a lot of property that needs managing. His job was to negotiate the best deals, whether they were leasing it out or leasing it in. He was their negotiator. It was a whole team, it was a whole department. That department had a commissioner as well. Now, as a Rebbe in yeshiva, he was deeply respected. Today, there's hundreds of former students all over the world who had my father as their Rebbe, who speak glowingly about that year that he taught them. But it's also all those that he ever interacted with in his real estate career. The job at the city of New York was also not enough, so he would come home from work at about 5 o'clock. He would eat dinner with the family. He would make sure that if we needed his help with our homework, he would be there. And then 7 p.m. he would go out to another job. and he would come home at about 10 o'clock at night. So he worked 2 jobs, and then Sundays he had a 3rd job. He did this with love. He did this because he wanted to make sure the family had what they needed. And in everyone that he interacted with, and in every conversation I've ever had with anyone that he interacted with, whether it was negotiations or it was transactions, they all said the same thing. He was always so patient, so friendly, more than anything, honest. They always felt integrity from him, that this was a man that would always be honest no matter what. Kiddsuh Hashem, a sanctification of God's name. So I found this 1987 paper in his drawer. This is, again, just going back 2.5 months ago. Several commissioners of the city of New York and high-ranking city officials, including the mayor at the time, Mayor Ed Koch, bestowed a commendation upon my father. And I found in this drawer the words that was said by one of the commissioners. He said, anyone familiar with the negotiation of leases and the history of abuses in the city must be in awe of this quiet, ethical, clever man who has been doing such a splendid and resourceful job for so long. Despite landlord pressures, despite client pressures, despite time pressures, he is truly an employee to be proud of and one whose story deserves to be told. Kiddsuh Hashem. They all recognized this was a man of honesty. When I would call his office in the Board of Education, I can hear it in the voice of the secretary of the awe and respect that she had for my father. Oh, you're Mr. Bryski's son? Mordechai Bryski's son? I say, yes. Wow, you're so fortunate. You're so lucky. Now, here is this man with a beard and a yarmulke, which wasn't so prevalent at that time in the city, brought his own kosher food because he couldn't eat in the cafeteria, didn't show up certain days of the year because they were Jewish holidays, a man that clearly looked like he belonged to a different era and a different time, and yet they found him to be the sweetest, kindest, gentlest, the most honest, approachable man in the office. Kiddsuh Hashem. Be that billboard wherever you go. You should be recognized as that wherever you go. So my mind took me back to the last few weeks of his life, when his illness, which was kept in check for a number of years, suddenly metastasized. I was there when he got the phone call from his doctor that there's nothing more that they can do. When you're hearing that on the phone, you understand what that means when you're hearing this from your doctor, that it has spread, and at this point, treatment does not make any sense to continue. And instead of the crying out, and it was time to praise the doctor and to console the doctor and to tell the doctor how appreciative he was for all the help that he had given him over the years. And we made a decision based on his wishes that he did not want to be hospitalized for the last weeks of his life. He wanted to be at home. Now, one of my brothers and one of my nephews happened to have some medical experience as paramedics, so they were able to set up this quasi-hospital-like situation at home, and we hired a caretaker. He was an African-American gentleman. His name was Don. He had a wonderful Jamaican accent. And his job was to help my father with day-to-day physical functions. And true to form, my father developed this instant close relationship with Don. And this Don really loved my father. And one Friday night, as it was getting closer to the end, my father told my brother that he wants my brother to help him go to shul the next morning for Shabbos davening. He had not missed a Shabbos davening in his life. And my brother says, you can't do that anymore. You're not able to walk, and it was really getting close to the end. You're not in shape to be able to walk to shul. And my father would not hear of it. He says, but I don't want to miss the Torah reading. So my brother said, why don't we make a deal? I'll come 9:30 in the morning. Shul starts at 10. I'll come at 9:30. I'll assess how you're doing. And if I think that you're well enough to walk with me to shul, then we'll do it. And if not, you're going to have to listen to me and trust me that God will understand and you'll stay home tomorrow. Deal. My father was a good negotiator. Deal. My brother comes at 9:30 Shabbos morning. My father's bed was no longer in the upstairs room. It was downstairs. We had made a room for him in the dining room. And he's not in his bed. Where is he? He goes upstairs to my mother's room and says, Ma, where's Tati? Tati went to shul. What do you mean he went to shul? How did he go to shul? He went to shul. I don't know. He said good Shabbos and he left. But how did he get to shul? Don took him. Don? Yeah. My father was able to negotiate with Don, his caregiver, Saturday morning at 9 o'clock before his son would come to have his negotiations to take him to shul. Now, along the way, where he couldn't walk anymore, Don lifted him up and walked him to shul because he knew how important this was for him. So my brother races to the shul. He comes into the shul. He sees my father in his talis in his regular place in shul and doing his davening thing. And right next to him is an African-American man mimicking the davening right next to my father. And he just looks at them like, what are you doing? You're violating the deal. And my father just gave him a smile, and Don gave him a smile too. He says, I work for your father. Your father wants to go to synagogue to pray to God. I go to synagogue with him to pray to God. In the words of King Solomon, mighty waters cannot suppress this love. There is nothing you could do to separate him from his connection to God. Nothing. He was going to go out his way, and his way was going to be with God. We fast forward 2 weeks. On the Hebrew calendar, we know we read a particular portion each week. This is Parshas Vayigash. It's somewhere in December time, late December, early January. My father was informed on that Shabbos that his newest great-grandson had been born. His grandson had given birth to a baby boy on that Shabbos. So his grandson, which is my nephew, his name was Yassi, comes to bring the news to his grandfather, Mazel Tov, you have another great-grandson. And the baby was born on Shabbos, which means when will the bris be? The following week on Shabbos would be the 8th day. So he says, Zaidi, the bris will be next Shabbos. And I want to honor you with holding the baby at the bris. It's called the sandik. It's considered the highest honor. One of the greatest honors to ever have is to hold a baby by the bris. So he's speaking to his grandfather, and he says to his grandfather, I want you to have the honor to hold your great-grandson at the bris, which will be next Shabbos. So my father was thrilled. Absolutely, I will do it. I will be there. And then things started to deteriorate pretty fast. By Sunday, we were all told to fly in from everywhere that things were going downhill. All of my siblings from the West Coast, we all flew in. And during that week, each day, it got progressively worse. It was hard to watch, hard for any of you to watch your father or your mother preparing to leave. My father spent a lot of time writing out checks for charity. It was very hard to decipher his handwriting because his hand was shaking tremendously. He wrote different notes to different people that he wanted me to deliver, which I did afterwards. He clearly knew what he was doing, and he had a list of what needed to be taken care of. At some point during that week, he could no longer communicate. He could no longer talk. So he started communicating by writing, and then when he couldn't write anymore, he started communicating just by making motions and playing, the charades game where you try to figure things out. Well, he was playing that game with us and gets quite frustrated when we couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't give up. He had a signal to me. He would do this. And I kind of knew what that meant from the week before when he was able to speak and he would make that motion. That was a DVD. He was showing me a circle. And there was a particular DVD that he wanted to watch, was the building dedication of this facility. He flew out for this, he made the Shechiyanu, he put up the mezuzah on the front door. And the building of this facility was very, very important to my father. It was an extremely spiritual thing for him, because to him it was the rebuilding of his shul in Khmelnyk that the Nazis burnt down. And in his mind, this was the revenge. And he insisted on being here for it. He needed to be here. So he wanted to watch, literally in the last days of his life, he wanted to watch the video of the grand opening. He watched every speech again. We had, again, it was an African-American singer that sang here, if any of you were here at the time, and he knew the song, Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. He sang that so well, this fellow. And my father was kind of clapping along as he's watching this literally on his last breath, but he was enjoying it so much. He also wanted to listen to, my father sang a lot of Hasidic melodies. He was an expert in Hasidic melodies, one of the top experts there are in the Hasidic melodies. And he knew a lot of them that very few people knew, passed on from generation to generation. And he recorded them so that people would have a CD of those melodies. And if anyone wants, I have copies upstairs I can give you afterwards. But he wanted to listen to those melodies. And this is the way he comforted himself in the last days of his life, by watching these things that were important to him, by giving charity, by writing notes to people that he wanted to say farewell to, and by listening to Hasidic songs. By Thursday night, the doctor came to see him and told us what we obviously didn't want to hear, that he didn't think he was going to make it until Shabbos, that this was nearing the end. Friday morning was rough. I was on call. We divided the shifts, so there was like 4 or 5 a.m. My father was struggling to breathe. I made the call, for everyone to come around. We had a doctor there right away, and my father opens his eyes and he does this to all of us. Now again, he's playing charades with us, and we have to try to understand what he's saying. Maybe you could figure it out. What does this mean? Holding the baby at the bris. He's motioning to us that he's not going anywhere. He's got a bris to go to tomorrow, and he plans on holding the baby at the bris. I mean, it took us a while to figure out what this meant, but that's what he was showing us, is the bris. And he motions to my brother, who would be the grandfather of this baby, I'm going to be there. And again, this is after the doctors told us Thursday night that he's not going to survive it. He won't be here for Shabbos. And my father was just insisting that he has to be there. Now, at this Shabbos, the question was, is he going to pull his Don thing off and go to shul? There's no way he can do that at this point, right? So what we said to him was, look, we're all here. We have a minyan, just the family. We'll bring a Torah to the house and we'll set up a shul right here. You don't have to convince Don to take you anywhere. We'll just make a shul here for Friday night davening, and hoping that he would still be alive Shabbos morning, we'll do that as well. Well, Friday night we did that, and we made a minyan in the house, and he encouraged us. He wanted us to dance around his bed, and in any type of way that he can participate in it, he was participating in it. Friday night meal, again, he couldn't eat at this time anymore. And for this I give credit to my wife, Tamati, who figured out what he was motioning. But he was motioning to his mouth, and what he wanted is he wanted to taste the food of Shabbos. Even if he couldn't swallow, just put it on his tongue so that he can feel part of Shabbos. And she figured that out and was putting everything that was being served at the table, just putting a drop on his tongue so that he felt Shabbos. Shabbos morning. My father is still with us, but he gets up earlier than the rest of us. And he has his friend with him, Don. And Don and my father have this conversation. Again, my father can't speak, but Don has already figured him out. And Don says to my father, It's Shabbat. I know the clothes that you regularly wore on Shabbat. What do you say? I change you. We'll put on the white shirt. We'll put on the long black coat. Before anyone gets here, you'll be dressed for Shabbos just like you always did. My father smiles to him, and they do that. And then Don says, and you're going to the bris. You're going to the bris. I don't care what they say. You're going to the bris. Now, this Don had to learn all these things in a matter of weeks. Bris and 8th day, and then he figured it all out. A religious man, just a sweetheart of a person. We come into the house, and there's my father, sitting up in bed, looking regal, really looking beautiful, well-rested, smile on his face. He's ready for davening. Now again, I want to explain certain rules and regulations of a synagogue to you. Some of you may be aware. When it comes to Torah reading, people are called up to the Torah to make a blessing. It's called an aliyah. Those of you that are bar mitzvah, you remember that, right? On Shabbat, how many aliyat are there? There's 7, and then there's the reading of the Haftorah, right? Who gets the first aliyah? A Kohen. Who gets the second aliyah? And who gets the third aliyah? Israelite. 4th, Israelite. 5th, Israelite. 6th, Israelite. 7th, Israelite. 8th can go to anyone. Okay? We are Kohanim. Okay? Which means that my father would get the first aliyah. Right? That's the way it works. That particular portion was the portion of Vayechi. Vayechi is the last portion of the book of Genesis. Anyone know what's the last portion of each book called that Shabbat? When they finish reading a book, what does the congregation say? Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. What does that mean? Strengthen yourself, and you will be strong. That aliyah is aliyah number 7. Aliyah number 7, if you remember what I just said, can only be given to an Israelite. It's considered a very honored aliyah to get, but only an Israelite can get a chazak aliyah. However, there's always exceptions to every rule. Who is making up this minyan? My whole family. We all Kohanim. We had a minyan of only Kohanim. Mordechai, who's my brother-in-law, was an Israelite. We kicked him out of the room. So it was a minyan of only Kohanim, which is as odd as it gets. Which means Kohen gets the first aliyah, Kohen gets the second aliyah, Kohen gets the third aliyah, Kohen gets the fourth. It is the only possible way for a Kohen to ever get the chazak aliyah. It can't happen any other way. So we present this to my father. By the way, it's all Kohanim here. Do you want the first aliyah? Do you want chazak, or do you want maftir? Your choice. And he made his head motion by chazak. Now understand, in my father's entire life, he has never gotten a chazak aliyah because he couldn't, because he's a Kohen. The last Shabbat of his life, he had the chazak aliyah of the book of Genesis. Do you know what that aliyah talks about? It talks about Joseph living until the bris of his great-grandson. That's what that particular portion is about. And it finishes with chazak, chazak, giving him strength. Davening is over, the bris is starting in 15 minutes. My father looks to Don looks to my father, Don announces to the family, your father, he going to the bris. He going to the bris. I'm taking him to the bris. And this special human being lifted my father up, put him in a wheelchair, hooked up his IV, oxygen mask, and he said, follow me. And he took my father with all of his children and grandchildren walking behind him, the streets of Crown Heights, to the bris of his great-grandson. My father came in, you can imagine the excitement in the room. No one believed that this would ever be possible. And the mohel takes the baby, puts the baby in my father's lap. And my father held his great-grandson for the bris. After the bris, he motioned everyone to start dancing. And everyone was dancing around him as he's holding on to his great-grandson, who was named Menachem Mendel after the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in this dancing, every time he saw a grandchild of his or a great-grandchild of his, he motioned to them, livelier, livelier. You know, the emotions of joy and sadness coming together at that particular moment was just so overwhelming, because you are watching something spiritual. You knew you were watching an angel. You knew you were watching something that you just don't ever see. You are watching a man so one with God, so connected to God, that even in these last moments of life, he knew how he wanted to leave this world. And then Don got to the dance floor and he said, I'm going to teach you some of my dances as you guys taught me some Hasidic dances. And he danced in front of my father as my father was holding on to his great-grandson. My father came home after the bris, went to sleep. Again, I had that early morning shift, and I can hear the breathing. He was struggling to breathe again. I again made my calls to everyone to come quickly. And then for a while, he calmed down. The breathing calmed. And my brother said, Todd, do you want me to put the talis and tefillin on you because it's already light outside? He motioned yes. And as he started putting his tefillin on, which would have been then for the last time, my father slipped into a state of unconsciousness, and his soul left this world a few hours later. I don't share this all with you because this man was my father, although he was. And it's not just that it speaks directly to the theme of what we're talking about, to live your entire life as a tziyun, as a Kiddsuh Hashem, a sanctification for God's name, as a billboard, as a banner. But I'm also sharing this because I suspect that many of you in this room, or are watching on Zoom or on Facebook or on YouTube, those of you who have lost your parents, have grappled or are still grappling with the same painful question. How in the world do we even begin to attempt to fill their shoes? How do we follow in such footsteps? You know, we refer to that generation, the generation of my parents, as the greatest generation. And I think a lot to that. There's something special about that generation that lived through World War II and somehow were able to come out and inspire others. How they rose to challenges in their lives and how they try to teach us to do the same. And it's hard to come to grips that there aren't too many left of that generation. It's just literally a handful in each community, perhaps. How do we go on without them? Without that inspiration? And so, what I got to be thinking is this prayer that I'm now saying morning, afternoon, and evening. The Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish. Why do we say Kaddish after a parent passes away? People think that Kaddish is a memorial prayer. It's a prayer for the dead. But you ever look at the translation? It doesn't say a single word about anyone dying. It doesn't say anything about souls in heaven. Nothing. And yet we say it again and again and again for 11 months by each service, morning, afternoon, evening. Nothing at all. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah, exalted and sanctified, not the soul of my father, not the soul of my mother, but his great name. The Kaddish prayer is exactly what it's called, Kaddish. What have we been talking about? Kiddush Hashem, the same word. Kaddish means the sanctification of God's name. What does that have to do with the loss of a loved one? It's because the very purpose and the very essence of every Jew's life is to be a Kaddish, to sanctify God's name. Each person in their own unique way. And so when the person passes on, there's now a void in the world. A void of that person's unique contribution to sanctifying God's name. When your mother, when your father passed away, there was a void left in this world because they had a unique way of sanctifying God's name that no one else could. So what do? Those who have survived them, what do we do to fill that void? We add an extra prayer, Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah. I now sanctify God's name in this world in the memory of my father, in the memory of my mother. Because they're not here to do it, I will do it for them. I will carry their Kaddish forward. In fact, Kaddish is meant to speak more to the soul of the living than it is to the soul of the departed. I'm not speaking to the souls in heaven when I say it. I'm speaking to the people here in the room. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah. And the same is true of Yiskar. More than Yiskar is meant about a memorial prayer for the departing loved ones. It's here for us, to remind us that we have a responsibility to carry their legacies forward. That's our task. How do we do it? When we're midgets, we're small in comparison to them, we do it by standing on their shoulders. Because if I may be small, but if I stand on my father's shoulders, I'm taller. I don't try to replace him. I'm not going to be him. I will never live up to that. But if I can take from that inspiration, and if I can add one little piece of light above that, standing on his shoulders, continuing his legacies, then we continue that Kiddsuh Hashem. That's how we create signposts. That's how we create billboards. That's how we create banners. That's how we are true tziyunim, the truest meaning of the word Zionists. By being that billboard. That's Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah. God needs partners in this world. That's the way he set it up. He experimented first without a partner for the first 20 generations, and it didn't seem to work. But when he partnered with Abraham, there was a great working partnership. God will do his things from up above. Abraham will do his thing here below. God needs partners in this world. And he picked us. He picked the Jewish people. He picked us to be the chosen people, not to become an arrogant people because of it, but to partner with him to bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. The world needs us to be good partners with God. The nations, as much as there's anti-Semitism in the nations, they need us. They desperately need us to stay true to who we really are. And so our answer, since our father Abraham, we have given God our very lives. In each generation, they have come to try to convert us away from Judaism. They have tried to silence us. They have tried to destroy us, exterminate us, kill us by the sword or by the gas chamber. They've tried to convert us by the kiss as well, by the embrace of assimilation. They've tried all different ways. And yet for almost 4,000 years, we have stood firm. We have walked through fire for God. And even now when nothing seems to make sense, where there's still hate out there in the world, we still hold on. And we increase our efforts, and we increase our growth. And whatever the world may out there, the evil of the world and the hate of the world may destroy, we'll rebuild tenfold. Because we won't stop. That's Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah. That's being God's partner in this world. That's being a Kiddsuh Hashem. That's sanctifying the name of God every day of our lives, in everything that we do. Thank you for joining me today.